Hello, everyone. It's great to see some faces I know out here. I'm going to talk today about virtual reality. And normally I talk about the tech specs and hardware and things and new research tech demos. And I will talk a little bit about some research we're doing at the end. But I'm going to shift gears a little bit from what I normally talk about. And that's because we're actually in year 2 now of PlayStation VR's release and high-quality consumer VR release. And that means I think we should focus on a few different things than we sometimes otherwise talk about. One of the areas is how can we increase value? And I promise this is the only equation that's going to be in my presentation. It's not a very complicated one anyway. But so I'll go into some of these increasing value ideas. Also, we want to improve the accessibility of VR. And accessibility has many meanings. The three kind of dictionary meanings are here, but really it's about making VR easy to obtain or use, easy to understand and appreciate, and then easy to use by people who have a disability. And that's kind of a special case of the other ones, but I think it's a really important special case that I'll call out specifically. So the bottom line is it's really about making VR more available, known, and usable by lots of people. So before I go into year 2, I wanted to talk a little bit about where we are right now. And I'm going to do this in the context of PlayStation VR because that's what I know the most about and have all the numbers for. So we're off to this great start. These numbers are from December 2017, so they're the first year of VR. We launched in October. Over 2 million units are out there as of that time. And then really it's great to see there's 12 million games purchased for those units. So people are playing the games, and they're really engaged. And at that time, at the end, there was 150 titles available, so a really wide breadth of content at the end of that first year. So what I wanted to also say is that the design in the first year, I think a lot of the success of why we got here is that we focused on value and accessibility from the beginning. We leveraged the existing hardware that we had out there already, the controllers and the console. We made it very easy to just plug and play the VR into the console. We added support for glasses. We consciously made an effort to make sure it felt comfortable for people that wear glasses. And a really important feature, which I'll talk more about later, is the social screen. The great thing about that is you see somebody else doing VR, you can understand what they're doing, and it really compels you to want to try it yourself. And as we all know, the most important thing about VR is trying it yourself. That's the way you can learn to appreciate it. So to that end, our sales team actually did 500,000 in-store demos during this first year. And that was a monumental effort. We had some really great bundling options, and we're very aggressive on our pricing. And then probably the most important thing is we had a really wide lineup of games. That's really why people are purchasing these things. And to help kind of make people be able to understand more of those experiences, we put a demo disc in which had a sampling of each of one of those games. So people, right when they got it, could try out many different kinds of experiences. So how do we increase value moving forward? Well, again, it comes back to content. That's the number one thing that matters for any kind of media. And for high-end VR, what that means is games. Games right now is what is driving the adoption of high-end VR. And I'm happy to announce, as of now, we already have 220 games available for our system, and actually 180 more in development to be released soon. So a huge breadth of content. And I'll go into a little bit more. We're starting to see some patterns emerge on what makes a successful piece of successful game for VR. Another thing that we've learned from our many years of the console is other uses of the console also help out. So people buy consoles for games, but they enjoy many other benefits like video streaming and other services. So having some of those other uses broaden what VR offers, I think, is also another way. PCs have done this a little bit better, I'd say, than consoles. But we're about to announce we've announced a game called Dreams, which is a creation game. And that is another kind of use, I think, that's really great for VR. And I'll talk about a really different use at the very end of this talk. So I'll talk a little bit about that more. And then finally, the other way to increase value is to reduce costs. And many of the headsets out there, all the manufacturers have been reducing costs. We reduced our cost in February, and we got a nice bump in our sales from that. And that's all I was going to say about this, but we actually just announced our days of play recently, and we announced a lot of VR games are going on sale. And maybe even more exciting than that is we announced some bundle pricing. So we have the Doom VR bundle, which is $199, which is a great deal. And then even better deal is our Skyrim VR bundle, which includes the 2 Move controllers and the camera and Skyrim and the headset. So quite a big offering. So we're really serious about increasing the value. Speaking of Skyrim, I mentioned there's starting to be some patterns evolving. And here's 4 very different games, but they all share some aspects in common, which is they all have great design. They all have a really great progression, which increases engagement. And before I talk, I'm going to talk about each of them individually, but before I do that, maybe we'll just take a quick look at these games. So the first game you saw was Skyrim on there, and millions of people have enjoyed Skyrim. Millions of people would love to visit the Skyrim world. And that's really what Skyrim VR delivers on. You get to feel like you're visiting that world. You can ride a dragon, you can swing a sword, shoot magic out of your hands. It's really all about the wish fulfillment. And the thing about this is not every game studio has this at their disposal to make one of these, right? But if you happen to be able to let somebody visit Middle-earth or become Batman, that's kind of one of these kind of applications that works really well. So that's one category. If you don't, another option is to take a game that's a really good game, flat screen, such as Wipeout Omega Collection, very slick, very nice game, and then make it even better in VR. This game, like everything about it in VR is better. The menu system is really cool, very 3D in VR. The kind of experience of driving the car is awesome because the whole cockpit is around you. It just really feels better in every way in VR. And they actually were so well received, the VR aspect of it. It was just an add-on that was free that you kind of could get later. Now they're remaking a standalone demo of the VR version just so people who already have PSVR can try it even if they didn't own this game. I guess, let me go back there for a second. There's a lot of games kind of in this genre. There's a Super Hot VR is a good example of this. Res Infinite, Thumper. One of the ones that's really popular in my household, Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes. That's a great VR kind of conversion. And then Resident Evil 7, I think, would fall into this category too. And that's one of the most popular games on our system in VR. So now I get to talk about my favorite game. I'm not supposed to say things like that, but this is my favorite game. And this is the kind of game that, from the beginning, was designed knowing it was going to be for VR. But it also is a great game in and of itself. The mechanics, the narrative is great. So Moss is this game about this little creature, this little mouse called Quill, and you control Quill in kind of a platformer aspect, but also you're part of the game. You see yourself reflected in the game, as you can see on that image on the right. You're the reader, and so you're kind of helping Quill get through the story. And I could talk about this for the rest of the talk, but I have to kind of move on. But the thing I do want to say about Moss, one great thing it does is it covers all the aspects of accessibility that I mentioned at the beginning. It's very VR comfortable. The set is completely kind of encompasses you. There's not very much movement, so even the very first time you've been in VR, it would be a good experience. The content itself is super approachable. It's this cute character everyone immediately falls in love with, and it's kind of got the hero's journey as the story so everyone can understand. And then the final thing is actually when the animator was making Moss, to make Moss more able to communicate, instead of using voice or something like that, the animator actually added sign language. And rather than keep talking about this, maybe I'll just let Quill introduce herself. So this, I think, was a really great thing that the animator did. And what I feel it did is it actually made Quill feel more intelligent. I don't actually understand sign language, but somehow Quill feels very intelligent in her communications. And she really has a connection to the player because of this, I think. And going a little deeper into that, I've actually gotten to talk with lots of different disabled gamers about VR, and they're very excited about VR, which surprised me at first. But actually, anything that kind of amplifies the sensory experience, maybe better visuals or spatialized audio or richer haptics, they're more motivated than anyone else, and they're really eager to help out with development for their communities. And I got to visit Gallaudet University recently, the School for the Deaf and Hearing Impaired, and they had great insights. They have their own research groups working on things related to this, and they're more than happy to share their ideas. And for me, not only did it help me kind of understand their point of view, but actually it kind of opened up the whole view of what is possible in VR from a new way of thinking. I guess it just kind of expanded my thought process to the point where I think that understanding will help out everybody, all the designs. So this is very important. I think just looking at the demographics does not really tell the whole story of how important and how valuable inclusive design can be. So, moving on, the final game I want to talk about is Rec Room. It's one of the highest engagement games that we have right now. It's free on our platform, so it's very accessible, and it's cross-platform, so you can play with your friends even on other systems. There's tons of activities. It has a really great kind of progression system. There's some other games in this genre, maybe like Werewolves Within is a game a little bit similar to this. But they're all focused about getting more people to play VR and share this kind of immersive experience together. So, talking about sharing, I already mentioned the social screen, which is really, really important feature for us. For when you're in a room with somebody else and they're doing VR, it's really important that you get to have some understanding of what they're experiencing. Unfortunately, that doesn't translate so well for a streaming situation. Now, streaming is a huge part of the game industry right now, in case you don't realize this. And it's really important because it's a great way to kind of get exposure of your game. And so people aren't streaming VR, then nobody's going to see VR. So we need to fix this problem. And I think one of the reasons this problem exists is because the spectator experience doesn't match the VR streamer's experience. What you see at home when you're watching the stream is nothing like this amazing immersive experience that the VR player is having. So our research groups have started thinking about how to address that. In London studio, they are looking at ways to give tools to the streamer themselves to make it so they can stream a better experience. So they have this set up where they can actually kind of composite in the player and give you a better view of what's happening from a different angle than the first-person view. And so this is work that they've already talked about at GDC, and it's really interesting and really cool research. My group is actually looking at the other side, where we're actually trying to enhance the end user's kind of experience and give them some tools. And we call this dynamic spectating, and it's a little bit complicated, but basically it lets you control the viewpoint of what you're seeing, so you can move the viewpoint. And this is actually, there's a thing related to this called desktop VR, and so that's one instantiation of this. Another one is kind of giving you a virtual camera into a virtual world. So rather than try to explain it, I think the best way to do is just to show it. So this one is first a kind of VR window into the virtual world. We made this kind of pseudo game in order to be able to test this out. So this is similar to an esports style game, and there's a VR player. He's actually on the other side of the television, so this is a true one-to-one kind of window into the VR world. You don't need to have that necessarily for a streaming experience, but we wanted to make sure it all worked out. And so by moving your head, if you just lean your head around, you see this kind of 3D view, and it gives you a little taste of what it would like to be in VR. I'm going to move on and show another version of this. So this is the same thing, only on a small TV. And instead of doing one-to-one, we have the kind of entire game experience shrunk down and fit inside of like a box inside of your TV. So when you move your head around, it's like you're looking at the whole game inside of a box. We call this actually Wonka vision in our in our office. So, and the last one on this kind of same idea here is using a tablet or a mobile phone or something to view. And in this case, you actually move it around, and it's behaving as if it's the camera of the tablet looking into the virtual space. And there's a marker on the bottom there. You could use lots of different techniques to do this. We're using Smart AR from Sony to do this. But it really lets you, again, have this kind of dynamic spectating experience where you can see, and it feels more 3D. It gives you a little taste of the VR aspect of it. So that got us to thinking, okay, well, this is awesome. You can move your viewpoint around. Well, there's nothing better to move your viewpoint around than when you're in VR. So to flip this whole thing upside down, now let's do spectating in VR. And you don't have to necessarily even spectate a VR game. You could actually spectate any game this way. So here is a player. He's in VR, and he's watching that game. He's sitting in the stands right now. Of course, I don't know if you're able to sit anywhere. Why would you sit in the stands? So now he's up against the cage, and he can get really close. He can move himself to the other side. He has embodiment, so he can look down and see himself. Now he just teleported over to the other side of the cage. So you can be anywhere you want to be, but you can also be any size you want to be. So now this isn't going to come across so well on a 2D screen, but now he's like the size of an ant standing on the ground looking up at his favorite streamer maybe playing this game. Now you can also be a giant. You can make yourself huge and look down and see the entire game below you. And that's a very, very powerful experience. And to give you some sense of the scale, we had him kind of come into the game, and now you can see when he reaches his hand out just how big he is. You could even ride on the shoulder of your favorite player as they're playing the game. That's what's happening right now. Or even crazier, you could ride on one of those discs, which I'm not going to show video of as he's throwing the discs. But VR spectating is this new use case that I think is something that actually, since spectating is so popular, it gives us an alternative. And the reason I think it's good, it's a great experience in and of itself, but it also, here, I'll give you the other view of what the player could actually see of the spectator. On the left is maybe a static spectator, but you'll see the VR spectator kind of just show up. There he is over there. And he's embodied now, so the spectator can be embodied. And you think about in a real sporting event or something, you're there, you actually have a body. Sometimes you might even get put up on the Jumbotron or something like that. So you can be kind of the star of the show for a while, even as a spectator. And we can do those same things. And if you happen to be a VR spectator, you have a lot more ways to emote and kind of put yourself into the experience. So I think VR spectators could become these kind of super spectators. And maybe you can't render the spectator all the time because he could really interfere with the game. And here he actually is riding on the disc. So the spectator is going to go for a little ride here. Not for the faint of heart, though. So I think this is just another use case of what having a VR system could be used for, a new use case. So, to summarize, I think the keys to continued success for VR moving forward, year 2 and beyond, is really to keep increasing the value through really high caliber content, new use cases, and also to improve the accessibility. Still, there's people out there who have never tried VR. Still, there's VR that doesn't work well for people. And we can keep doing that and keep sharing how amazing this virtual experience is. Thank you.